Good morning. My name is Helen Miller and I'm Assistant Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to the first day of this in-person meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 20th September 2017. This in-person meeting is being held in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB website, along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. Present from the GRI Secretariat today are Bastian Buck, Director Standards Division, Anna Krutova, Manager Standards, Laura Espenach, Manager Standards, Tamara Bergkamp, Manager Standards, Veronika Wachung, Manager Standards, and Pamela Carpio, Senior Coordinator, Governance Relations. We will now start with a roll call. Attila Yerlikaya.
Present.
Daniel Taiyang. Daniel Taiyang is on the line. Evan Harvey.
Present.
Jürgen Buxbaum.
Yes, present.
Ken Swift.
Present.
Kirsten Margrethe Hovey. Michelle Wascher. Robin Leeson. Stian Vandrach. Sulema Pioli. Vadakebat Nankumar. And Judy Kuszewski, GSSB Chair.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. We would like to note that GSSB members Dwight Justice, Julia Wilson, and Daniel Ingram will join later today. I'll now hand to the chair, Judy Kuszewski, to open the meeting.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much, Helen, and good morning. Hello to all GSSB members, to the GRI team, and all of the support staff here helping us out. And hello to all of our stakeholders who may be listening in on the web. Welcome to this meeting of the GSSB. Over the course of these 2 days, we have a lot of material to get through that has to do with our strategy as a group and the progress that we are making towards the delivery of our work plan, as we have discussed on many occasions over the last months. I believe you all have your agenda in the packet, and I would like to just draw your attention to what is happening today. Right. Can I just note, for the purposes of process here, that because we have a few members who haven't joined us yet, we are lacking a quorum.
Hi, this is Pamela Carpio, Senior Coordinator Governance. With Daniel Tayan on the line, we have 12 members of the GSSB, so we have quorum.
Good to know. Okay, so then we can do things like approve the minutes from the last meeting. Excellent. Okay, thank you. That's all I was going to point out. So we don't have to make any changes then to the order of anything in order to make sure that we do those correctly. So what we will be doing is approving our meeting summary from our last virtual meeting, and then we're going to be looking at the current activities of the Standards Division broadly across the whole of our work plan. We'll have a couple of project updates for the occupational health and safety and water projects, and then we'll have a break. And then we'll be looking at human rights and tax and payments to governments as the next project updates, economic performance. And then we're going to look at the monitoring program, which looks at the Standards Division's activities to observe the uptake of the standards in the first year since their release. After lunch, we will be joined on the speaker phone by Tim Mohan, the GRI Chief Executive, who is in New York this week. and he will be walking us through the GRI strategy refresh in a private session, as that's not GSSB meeting, business per se. And following that session, we go back into the public session with Tim again to talk about his input that he would like to make on behalf of the Secretariat into our work program review. We're then joined by a guest, Wim Bartels, who is a member of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, and he'll be updating us as to their progress and the opportunities for collaboration with GRI and GSSB. And then we have a break. We'll have more updates from the team, this one on regulation and policy activities. We will have a sort of general discussion of our own findings individually and as a group in light of all of that information. And then we'll close out the meeting later on. And then tomorrow, we'll have a quick review of what we're doing today. And we will be then looking at our work program, how we prioritize our projects and how we plan our future work program, and the additional projects that we want to propose for the coming year. That will be interspersed by break and lunch, and we want to come out of tomorrow's meeting with an approved revised work program that we will release for public consultation at the end of this meeting. And then we have some time for any other business. We have not received any specific requests from any members as to AOB that you would like to propose on the agenda, but we do have time for it. There are always things that come up during the course of the meeting. If there are any things that fall outside the scope of any of these discussion points, would you please make a note of those and just ensure that we have some idea that you might like to raise something. Otherwise, we will just simply carry on whatever comes out of this discussion, pick those up during AOB. And then we'll close out the meeting. We will aim to do that quite promptly between 2 and 3 o'clock local time tomorrow afternoon, so that people can commence their travels and do all the other things that they need to do. Are there any questions, or does anybody want to discuss anything about the budget? The agenda, not the budget. Okay, well, hearing none, so I think that is approved then for the purposes of this meeting. I would like to turn it over to Bastian to walk us through now our first session. Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, we do have to approve the meeting summary from the 19th of July. This is your item 1, the draft summary. We have not received any advance comments or corrections or edits so far as to this summary. Does anyone have any now, or would you like to discuss any aspect of this meeting? Okay. Can I ask for a member to move that we adopt the summary of this meeting? Stian van der Haag, and a second. Second, right? Okay, Kent Swift is seconded. And there's no discussion at the moment, is there? So I think we can simply adopt it by consensus. Okay, thank you very much. And our next quick, there it is. Before we begin the review of the Standards Division activities, we have prepared a draft resolution that I would like to ask the GSSB to adopt, if it is all right with you. As you all know, the first executive director of GRI, Ernst Lichteringen, died very suddenly over the summer. And as the GSSB, we would like to formally acknowledge his contributions. And so we've drafted this proposal here. The GSSB resolves to formally acknowledge Ernst Lichteringen's pivotal contribution and highly respected leadership in pioneering GRI and the practice of sustainability reporting globally. Ernst led GRI for 12 years, transforming it from a startup initiative into a globally respected and self-sufficient organization. Under his leadership, GRI established itself as the world's most widely used sustainability reporting standard setter. The GSSB members regret Ernst's sudden and untimely passing and extend their condolences and deepest sympathy to his family and friends. Would anyone care to discuss this particular resolution or add anything to it at all at this point? Can we have a motion to adopt? Yes, I think we've got a first and a second here, and if there's no discussion, then this resolution is passed by consensus. Thank you very much. Now, with that, I think I can now turn it over to Bastian to talk us through the Standards Division activities.
Thank you, Judy, and good morning also from me. So the intent of this first session is just to give you an overview of all the activities that the Standards Division is currently running, as well as a bit of the context in which we are operating. And we will go into a lot more of the specifics over the course of the day, as you've seen on the agenda. Specifically, the standard setting projects are the ones that we will focus on today, because this is the core part of the work program, and most of the staffing capacity sits behind those projects. And I want to start on a very positive note with some statistics about the uptake, and then continue with more positive news around a lot of the activities that we're currently running, and specifically also the launch activities around the standards. So let me start with a brief summary of what we are seeing in terms of engagement with the GRI standards. And as I mentioned to the GSB earlier, we have now the capacity and through our website and everything that we've introduced with the transition to standards to track engagement of stakeholders with our contents in a quite focused way. And one thing that we've seen is that there is a fundamental change in terms of the level of interest between just 2 years ago and now when it comes to downloads of our core product, the GRI standards. What you see on this slide is that there are more than 35,000 unique users of our contents at the moment. Very many of them return regularly to consult our resources, but very importantly, between October last year and now, we have more than 35,000 individuals that have downloaded the standards and keep coming back to look at other resources that are available on our website. And we present the contents in different formats. By far the most popular right now is a download of all the individual standards in a zip file, and people seem to engage that way with the contents. Interestingly enough, you see also that some of the supporting resources, and in particular this mapping document that we've created to enable those that use G4 to transition to the standards, are really, really popular, with close to 7,500 downloads. And I think we as a team, we take that as an indication that people have started that transition, are looking into it, and are leveraging the resources. I can say overall also, and I'll come back to that later, we have very positive feedback for these supporting resources as well. This is of course only indicative. We do know that very many in institutions that use the GRI, is it for report preparation or then the data users, there's one person that deals with GRI directly, downloads the relevant documents and shares them out in the organization. So we do expect that there are very many more users of the contents. Nevertheless, we have tracked also in the past the downloads, and we see really a change in the level of engagement. And one more note about this is also we are for the first time able to actually also solicit contact information from those that download the content. So we have now the ability to reach out to those that have given us their permission to do so, to inform them about the activities of the GSSB. And that will be a key way of engaging the right stakeholders, those that are dealing on an ongoing basis with these contents going forward. And we've started to do that with the ongoing projects, and we will establish these channels more going forward. This next slide is just an overview of the top downloads beyond just the standards. And one thing that I wanted to note here is that we actually see that apparently we were also able to point to the universal standards that we've created with the foundation, the general disclosures, and the management approach as the most important documents to engage with. They are ranked really high in the downloads. That was, I think, intended also with the transition to standards to set them out as the most important, basically cornerstones of our offering. And you see that coming back here with the downloads as well. That's very positive. A last note is when you look at your work program and the agenda that you have already adopted, many of those things that we have on the menu for review turn out to be also the most popular standards. And that is not, I think, because we've started these projects. For some of them, like economic performance, we haven't publicized that widely. It is just, these seem to be the contents that are consulted most, which I think is another positive signals that you have selected the right priorities for the coming years. We have, and we will go into a bit more detail in a moment about that, we have also started to issue translations. And what you see is that this enables us also to reach a much wider set of stakeholders. So it is very clear from these first figures that, and you see here in particular the introduction of the Spanish translation, that actually adds to the numbers of downloads, that enables stakeholders to engage with the contents that would probably not engage with the contents that if they were just available in English. Just a confirmation that it is the right thing to do translations. We are also learning a lot about which translations and markets are probably more key to our work, because we see real uptake, and we will come back to that also at a later point. I was referring already to the downloads of the G4 compared to the standards, and what you see is with the introduction of the standards, you see less and less downloads of the G4 and a steady, I think, a rate of downloads for the standards. And we expect in the coming months, this is only the first year of adoption, that we will see many more, because it is probably realistic to assume that in the next reporting season, about 1 to 2/3 of the current reporters will actually move from G4 to the GRI standards, because you have decided that the standards become effective next year, 1st of July. But this is also pointing in the right direction, more people engaging with the contents already in preparation for this transition. When it comes to actual GRI standards-based reports, as of end of August, we had around 190 reports registered with GRI. And there are two disclaimers to these numbers. I think one is we're reasonably sure that this is only probably a fraction of the reports that are actually out there. This is very much collected on a basis of organizations contacting us. That's one, and a bit of research that is put in here by the standards division, but more importantly, the wider secretariat and our data partners globally. But from the travel that we've done, the local engagement, there seem to be probably double the number of reports out there at this stage. And that would be more or less in line with what we had expected, that in the first year there would be a slow rate of adoption with early movers and the leaders, and then we would see more adoption in the second year. Also important here to note is that the predominant mode of engaging with the contents and issuing reports is the core option. So that's the most popular option to use the standards at the moment. Again, very much in line with expectations, but also interesting that there is a significant share still that goes for the comprehensive option. And that is quite reassuring given the discussions you had last year, where you were a bit in doubt whether the comprehensive option would still be feasible for organizations. We have a question.
I suppose this is based on what they have self-declared. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are real comprehensive reports.
I was about to come to that point. Yeah. So I think we also have to look at these numbers, of course, with a pinch of salt. There is, I think, traditionally, and there's always been the tendency to make claims about the adoption of the standards that are not. Well, in actually quite many cases, 100% in line with the expectations set out in the standards. So I think we have to look at this also as an ambition, and probably we have to also invest more in guidance, educational materials around what it exactly is that constitutes in accordance. But I think there was a worry last year that organizations would be discouraged to explore both options, and maybe even that we would fall back to just a reference to GRI. And that's not something we see in the claims right now. And I think that's the last point I would like to make. The GRI reference option is right now not strongly used. And that's something to be monitored. It's not that we have any clues into why that is. We do expect more adoption of that option with the EU directive kicking in and some of the stock exchange requirements kicking in, because this is probably the rationale for organizations to consult a few of our standards and not the set in totality. And then just one more on who is publishing those reports. There are very many in Europe and Asia. These are the strong, and North America. These are the strongest markets, followed by then Latin America, Africa, and Oceania. This has been the picture for the last years. We are, I think, still generally surprised about the uptake in Asia. And that is very strong, and is also driven by the policy environment and stock exchange, so market regulator initiatives. When it comes to organization size, we still see the divide. We have this, when organizations come to us, they can declare whether they're a multinational organization or a large, so national-based organization. There, with the statistics, I think we have to look at what we can probably ascertain from it is the vast majority of organizations using the standards right now are large organizations and few SMEs. But the split that we're seeing, 7 to well, more than 80%, probably large. That's traditionally, I think, in line with the expectations that we have. It will be interesting how successful GI overall will be in promoting this for SMEs. As we've shared at the last meeting, there's a program underway to get 2,000 SMEs reporting. That will be about 50% of our current followership in numbers of reporters, and that will kick in over the next 2 years. So we will be able to observe that here as well. Are there any questions about the statistics? Yeah, sorry.
Bastian, one question that I face is where companies need to do the declaration in terms of how they use the standards, whether they reference it or whether it's comprehensive or core. Is it in the report itself? Is it in the GRI index? And that's probably something that we can catch in the frequent asked questions, is just some guidance in terms of where the best place is, so that you can also trace that from a global perspective.
Yes, and this is a question that we are seeing as well. We will discuss also later as part of the FAQ that aspect. And I think in general, I think the feedback that we have from those that research reports is that the claim is in very many different places. it's oftentimes not prominent enough, at least from our perspective, and indeed, maybe it would be helpful to issue more guidance of what would be at least the preferred option. We discussed last year whether there would be something, a stipulation, it has to be on the first page, it has to be next to the CEO statement or things like that. You decided not to do that because of the range of different formats that are available. But on the other hand, stakeholders engage with us, and I would definitely echo your feedback there. What's the best possible way of making these claim statements?
Is the option available when you register the report on the GRI website to mark it then as comprehensive or referenced?
So right now there is an option available on the website. We have the disclosure database, and in principle some organizations have been registering their reports there. But we see that this tool is not fit for purpose. It is actually quite involved to upload the report. Lots of details are asked, and we're working on a technology solution to make that a much more focused exercise. We're working with the scenario that it takes 2 to 3 minutes to upload a report eventually. But this is unfortunately delayed. We've pushed very hard. The team has worked on this a lot, but it will really only kick in towards the end of the year, unfortunately. Right now, we're engaging stakeholders that contact us, and where we are aware of reports, we're also reaching out to them to confirm that they indeed have issued a GI report with a claim statement. But that's definitely a transition issue that where we could have been quicker to provide the right solution. Yep. Any further questions about the stats? No. Then I want to briefly touch upon the rollout activities for the standards. Again, we've presented this to you before, and we're basically coming to an end of this launch moment and the rollout of the GI standards. We have conducted so far 26 events in 24 countries. More than 3,000 attendees at those events. And what's important for us, I think, and that was from the get-go, was to give overall the right context for the launch of the standards. So combine the launch of our core product also with local relevant content and make it a valuable experience for those that participate. And we have really, really positive feedback about the overall event experience. So far, 91% of the attendants of these events have given us feedback that they consider the event experience good or very good, which is a lot better than anything we had before. And this is closely related also to the contents that we are able to present there. Maybe more importantly from a perspective of this board even is to what extent we are able to convey the messages, the key messages around the standards. And there we have feedback that 86% say that leaving the meeting they have a clear understanding or very clear understanding of the GI standards. And that was something that we worked very hard for, I think, in terms of preparing the right contents, also adjusting our presentation over the course of the different events. And we seem to deliver a very steady quality, a very constant, high level of quality with these events. And that's also thanks to all the support that we receive from the events function and the network engagement team in particular at the GRI Secretariat. They've really gone out of their way to facilitate all the logistics and the stakeholder discussions that lead up to these events. Oftentimes for us here in the team, it is left to do the really nice thing of going somewhere, being greeting lots of stakeholders that have a keen interest in talking to us, and then be on stage to present the contents, which is a really nice job, but there is a lot of work going into it before that. Last note here is that we also have generally everywhere we go a lot higher interest in what we do. Almost all the events have been oversubscribed. We have on average 123 attendees, and that's compared to G4 where we're at 81. So we see also increase of interest across the board. And a last note about this, I think each and every event, I personally have been to 14 of those, you meet people that have not engaged with GI before. And that's companies, but that's increasingly also data users and regulators that use these events for information to get in contact. And that's generally a very positive trend that we are seeing with these events. But we have questions. Jürgen? And
Well, congratulations. That's really something. But could you kindly please provide a little more update on the, like, if you can double click this participant, who they are, and the geographic split of the events and the plan for the next term? Thank you.
I prepared a slide for that. So these are the countries where we have been so far, I think when it comes to countries where we have seen a lot of interest, I would definitely have to point to Argentina. Tamara was present at that event, and we had a couple of hundred people joining for this. We had also strong participation in a number of other countries, but I would again point to the Asia as one of the regions where we always tried to convene, but it was always in the low 20, 30 numbers of participants for events traditionally, and now we had multiple events with 100 plus attendees and there. There are still a couple of events coming up. We will have a German translation, so there will be Germany and Austria coming up, a French translation going forward. Actually, not on this list, but it happened yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. There was an event also in the Arab region. So we are still continuing to do this, but basically we're coming to an end of this process. Any other questions? No. Okay. Let me then continue with the translations. This is the overview that we currently have. So we have completed Spanish, traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, Indonesian, and Japanese, and there was still to come a simplified Chinese, German, French, and Arabic. We are also continuing to seek funding for Italian and Portuguese, but this turns out to be very complicated this time around. In particular for Portuguese, that's a surprise, because in the past this was oftentimes the first translation that GI made available. But that is in part also, at least in the feedback that I'm having, is because many of the organizations have moved to English as a business language, at least for the CSR engagement, and so they're using the standards. You can also see that we have first reports from there. But we nevertheless see that as something we want to, if at all possible, realize in the next months. If there are no questions, I want to then touch briefly upon the standard setting projects and just point you to the different sessions during which we will discuss these today. So we will have an update on the OHS and the water project. These are the two projects that are probably, well, they're definitely most advanced, and we are in public consultation at the moment. These will be the sessions right after this one. 1.21 and 1.22. We then move into the human rights discussion. There we still have for this meeting an approval pending of the technical committee that we're putting together. And we're, I think, we've started this process. Laura is managing it. We're starting to build also the contents that go into these discussions, but on timeline and everything, this is something we want to discuss with you today. Same thing applies to tax and payments to governments. You have approved a membership already. We will discuss a bit more of the timeline for that. Currently on hold is economic performance, a project that you have also approved in terms of a project proposal, not for a membership. And what we said at the outset, that a lot more research, desk research, would need to go in to it. And currently, with our staffing reality and Deputy Director Chelsea Reinhardt, who has left us very recently, and we're not able to commence this project. And we will unfortunately have to put that on hold for now. But we are also looking into hiring with an eye on other competencies with the candidates to advance this important field for us. Last but not least, we will also discuss today one of the implications or knock-on effects of current projects, and that's related to water and then effluents and waste. We have an effluents and waste standard. Now that we've updated the water standard and subsumed the effluents discussion there, we basically have orphan contents that we need to take care of. So it implicates that we will look at the waste-related contents as one of the next steps. That's something we will be discussing in the 1.22 session today. Then, I want to use the remaining minutes of the session to give a quick update on other projects and follow up on the action items from prior meetings. And these are the meetings from the last in-person meeting and the calls between March and this meeting. So first of all, we actually had a couple of discussions over the course of the in-person meeting in March around the report, review activities, monitoring, and to what extent we can work with external research partners. And while we haven't applied, I think, enough resources to scope that out to a big project, we had the opportunity to actually work or start working with one university, the Arizona State, and the business school there, to just test a bit to what extent we can bring students into our research activities and work with them, applying our methodology to research reports. We clearly see a capacity issue on our end. We have invested, again, quite heavily for the monitoring program. The review of reports takes considerable resources. And the question is whether this is a good application of resources that we have on staff here in Amsterdam, or whether we can actually, if you will, outsource some of that activity and have a proposition for academic institutions, research institutions, where they stand to benefit also from this collaboration. So we've while this is not what we had promised in March, where we said we would actually publicize these research opportunities wider and focus a bit more on research questions that we want to generally explore. I think this is an intermediate step. We want to work closely with a group of students now that are available to help us between September and November to see to what extent we can bring them on board, educate them about the GRI standards, about the methodology that we use to research reports, and see what quality of outcome we can achieve in such a collaboration. And there are all kinds of questions we have at the moment. Tamara is managing this in terms of how it is to work with a remote team, how it is to work with people that have an idea of what GI is, but none of the detail yet, and how quickly we can transfer them into a mode where they can really contribute over and above what we can expect to get out of current resources here. It's also that how much do you need to invest to actually get this research going, whether in the end we apply the same number of hours to get them started, and we could have done the whole job ourselves. These are a bit the questions I think is familiar to all of those that have done these kind of research projects. What we are currently scheduled to do is to run this project and then provide an update early next year. And I would hope that we can then take a decision to branch this out wider and actually involve more research partners. This is by no means an exclusive collaboration or anything like that. Shouldn't be interpreted like that at all. But they have come forward and said that they would have resources, and we just jumped to the occasion and said it's great that we can test this model with you. Then in terms of action items that we've completed, we had, since March, a number of conversations about the ongoing standard setting projects, and I can report back that we've completed all those action items. A couple of references will still be in the presentations today regarding follow-ups, but in general, these are complete and we've followed up on everything. We have in March said that we would look at periodic updates by the Chief Executive, Tim Moen, and Judy had a conversation with Tim. Tim will join us also during the calls going forward on a regular basis to update about discussions happening on the corporate reporting dialogue, but more broadly also to give inputs to your work program. We have also committed in April to look at the summary format. The summary of the call in July that you approved today was following the direction of the discussion we had with you. Again, if there is more feedback on how we should be putting these contents together in a summary, the meeting contents, let us know. This can probably be refined further, but we've taken the lessons learned from the last months and we are currently working with that format. We've also attached today for this session the letter that we have sent to the Taiwan Stock Exchange. That was a discussion we had in July with you. The Taiwanese Stock Exchange has reached out to us to inquire about the effective date of the standards and how that relates to their regulatory approach, and we've responded to that. And that is a good example of something we can expect from very many more policymakers and regulators going forward. We will keep you in the loop around these things. What we agreed in July was that I and Judy would look at responses going forward and bring them to your attention where it makes sense. But we will circle back to that policy and regulator engagement later this afternoon. For action items that were pending and are now covered by the meeting agenda, you requested an update on the monitoring program. Tamara will run that later today, last session of this morning. We also have had a discussion about a consultation on human rights reporting practice, and we have actually done this research, and this will be presented by Veronica today. We've invited, in follow-up of the March meeting, the TCFD to present to you today their final recommendations so that you have all the input to decide what could be potential next step regarding this initiative. And we're also going to discuss tomorrow a bit more on the prioritization. As we've discussed in March, the DPOC has given feedback that they would like to see more evidence for taking into consideration national and international developments in your work program prioritization. And we will discuss that tomorrow. And in particular, we will tomorrow have a look together at the due process protocol and that concept that is set out there that prioritization should happen through the involvement of key stakeholders. So we need to zoom in and decide which are the key stakeholders that we should engage on a continuous basis for feedback about national and international developments that you should be considering. Then there are two pending action items which we haven't concluded on and that are currently not on the program, at least not in a way that they were discussed in March. And that is, we had mentioned to you the programming of the GRI Secretariat around SME reporting, and that there was a tool being developed specifically for SMEs to help them in creating GI referenced reports. This project is still underway. They're making good progress, but they're slightly delayed, so they're not able to present this to us today or tomorrow. But we have them scheduled for the November call. So this is pending, but we will come back to that action item. And a last point then about further scoping work on report quality and credibility assurance. To connect to the discussion that we had in March, where we said, so what exactly is it that should fall under the mandate of the GSB? What is it that we want to do in that space? And this is something that we've parked for capacity issues. We were not able to address that. Also in anticipation, I think over the summer months of Chelsea leaving, we focused on other things. And right now we simply don't have the capacity to advance that very much. But there will be, in the session with Tim, an update around capacity that we can add in that space. So it is something that we are hopefully picking up rather sooner than later. These are the only 2 action items where we that are really pending at the moment, and after this meeting we are able to conclude on the rest of them. Last mentioning then regarding the team. So currently we have 11 full-time equivalents on the team. We have 4 vacancies to be hired until the second quarter of 2018. We have the deputy director recruitment, so the replacement for Chelsea's post, underway. We currently expect a completion of that process in October, but I have over the past years learned the hard way that even though you can be close to something, it doesn't mean much in these contexts. So we will keep you in the loop about that, but once we have the deputy director in place, with the selected person, we will have a discussion whether we actually want to structure the additional hiring in a process together with this new person, or whether we can go ahead already in hiring in these resources, which would enable us to bring them in probably in the first quarter of 2018. For the deputy director, we're discussing to bring this person in as of January. We have a 3 months lead time realistically. It almost always, and certainly for the set of candidates that are still now under discussion, it would involve moving people from a different country to the Netherlands together with a family and everything that's involved there. So it is a 3 months time frame for sure that we're looking at. We also, and I just alluded to that on the earlier slide, we will have possibility to look into capacity around report quality work and assurance related work. And that's a budget allocation that would enable us to have 2 or 3 FTEs hired also in the next months. That's still under discussion. It was not part of the budget allocation that has been confirmed in a meeting that we had with the GI board, Judy, Robin, and I last week. But it's likely to kick in. We will have more information about that later today. So that would be in addition to the 15 FTEs that we look at for mid of next year, that we can hire an additional 2 to 3 people. That's our current staffing. I think we've come a long way. Just a few years ago, we had a team of 5, 6 people on staff here. But given your ambitious agenda and what you have just in standard setting projects, the 15 people that we have there are needed in our assessment right now to roll out the human rights and economic performance projects in particular, because these projects, while initially they are more of a principle level discussion, and the first set of recommendations will likely only point to a discrete set of standards or set out basically the broad lines of a standard review, then the next step is actually the review of probably very many standards. And in the case of human rights, it can be anything between 5 to 10 or even more of the current GI standards, and we might be adding. And similarly for economic performance, once you open up this whole discussion, it's a significant number. So it's in anticipation of this that we have put a budget request forward, and we would be able to run these projects also according to the timelines that we've been discussing with you. But there is very limited capacity to add projects over and above these commitments at this point. And we have a question from you.
What are the sources of funding you are expecting to finance staffing of the GRI? Who are the institutions who are expected to fund?
Yeah, so right now the arrangement in terms of the governance structure is that GRI, the GRI foundation that is behind GRI, is funding the standard setting activities. And they're funding the standard setting activities through all the revenues that come into GRI, and that can be through, I think, 3 main sources. One is government funding. So we have several, and currently a good portion of the staff time in particular of this team are funded directly through government grants, with a number of governments, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the UK, they all have budget allocated in their grants to GRI that are specific for standard setting. We have revenues as GRI out of services that we are providing. and we have revenues from GI out of the membership program. And these are probably the three income sources that then enable GI to make budget allocations for standard setting. We are currently in discussions with several governments to either continue their funding also for standard setting, or to develop new grants with them. But there is nothing in particular that I would bring to the attention here of the GSB. I think the most important thing for the members here is that GI has a certain budget allocation for the coming year, which actually enable us to grow the team and hire back also those people that we've lost over the last months. That's one, but also there is an indication, and that's indicative at this stage, that we were able to grow even further in the consecutive years, so 2019 and 2020. So there is a commitment that we will be able to add to the team. Yeah.
Can I add a question on this? Those who fund hiring people, like governments or whoever it is, can they take any type of direct, indirect influence on who is hired, what the work is, what the person does, the contents of the job? So they have all their contracts with the GRI and there's no influence whatsoever.
Correct. So all the contracts are with the foundation, GI. All of the staff members also in the standards division are employed by GI. And there are no direct, there's no direct engagement at all, or indirect engagement in the hiring process. We have commitments towards government donors in the sense that we have committed to continuous improvement activity. So they have not subscribed to particular subject matters that they would like to see. But once you have adopted something, like take, for example, human rights, that is of interest to several of the government donors. So we are reporting back to them and say, this is what's happening with your funding. But this is after the fact. So we're not committing now to projects that we want to run in the future. But once you have designed a work program, we go back to the donors and said, this is where your funds are applied. Yeah? But no direct influence whatsoever on the hiring process.
Bastian, do we have a long-term staffing plan in terms of the career planning and the future of our esteemed staff here at the Standards Division? For example, do we have a structured development plan for the team members, or is the standard setting process is an ongoing process and we'll be always needing more and more people, or you eventually see this curbing down? So any specifics?
No, I think for your last question, that depends very much on the ambition of this board. The more projects you want us to conduct, the more staff we need. There's clearly a relationship there. I think for the first part, GI in general is probably at a stage we've outgrown the startup phase. We're no longer a small organization, and there are many more things that need to be put in place. We've briefly touched upon that in the March meeting as well. There are no structural elements in terms of career planning in place, but there are lots of implicit arrangements. One of the things that I personally take pride in is that many of the members that we have around have sticked around, and this team particularly. We have a very low turnover overall, and we constantly invest also in training and all of that where needed. But there's probably a much more structured approach that is needed now, especially that we're moving from teams of 5 to 6, 7 people to hopefully something that's closer to 20. And that's something we're looking at the moment. You will have also an update later from Timon about the general strategy refresh that is underway at GRI. And these are components that he is looking at as well. But the support for that would also come out of the GI human resource function in general. That wouldn't be left only to the management of this team, soon to me.
I have to also admit that the cooperation with the Arizona State University is a very valuable one. The academic linkages truly contributes a lot in content development, research, a piece of such work. But besides that, did we ever consider a certain secondment kind of a plan with corporations, states, not in decision-making roles, but content-providing roles? Would you ever consider, or did you ever consider that?
So we have quite a history in that. And one thing we've run, for example, the G4 process with several secondees. And while this was a successful project, one thing we learned is that the time investment to bring people up to speed with what we do, and then have them as valuable team members, and the stretch of time where they can contribute is actually, compared to the time that you need to bring them into the process, fairly short. And secondees usually it's between 12 and 18 months. And what we see with bringing new people on staff, it takes between 6 and 12 months to get them going. And then you lose them again. So in designing our standard setting activities, and also when we moved out of this old governance structure, one of the things that I've put forward and I continue to put forward is that my strong preference is to have people on staff. And one of the discussions we have with all new candidates is that these are also longer term commitments. I think this job is most rewarding in the second, third and fourth year with GRI, because this is where you really start to build your network around certain subject matters. You understand the process, you understand the engagement with the board and all of that. So we're really trying to build that out just as staff that is actually employed by GRI, and that's the predominant model. We can revisit that at a later stage. Right now, I can only say that with what we have achieved in the last year with the transition to standards, I think we would have struggled with taking on such a demanding project with a set of new people that are only there for the project lifetime. We profited a lot from having people around to run the project that have been around for a long time. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Bastian, for all of that information. We're running a little bit behind schedule this morning. We started a little bit late, but we're a few minutes behind schedule. Just to say that, as you can see from all of this update information, and most of these topics are things that we're going to be talking about in a lot more depth over the course of today and tomorrow. We are keeping up our tradition of keeping the standards division extremely busy, even as we've seen in light of the fact that we're somewhat short-staffed relative to where we'd like to be right now. And of course, with all the money in the world and all the brightest people in the world, we would still, I think, be looking at a very busy schedule, wouldn't we? So thank you very much for continuing to press ahead on so many different fronts. We're going to move now into the project update on occupational health and safety. I will turn it over to Laura. Laura, do you have the slides? Great. Thank you. Please carry on.
Thank you, Judy, and good morning, everyone. So during this session, I'll give you a brief update on the public comment activities that we have done around the occupational health and safety standard. And we'll give you a preview of the feedback and comments that we are hearing so far from our stakeholders. So the public comment opened on the 10th of August for both occupational health and safety and water. And at that moment in time, we reached out to our network and to some of our key organizations and partners to announce the public comment and to help us promote the projects. We had 2 live webinars at the beginning of the public comment, which were open to all stakeholders. We had 1 recorded webinar outlining the changes in the draft, which was available from the very beginning on our website for those who wanted to dive into the changes right away. And we will have 2 additional live webinars next week. In addition to those webinars, we have also organized dedicated webinars with certain groups who have an interest in occupational health and safety or reporting more generally. We had webinars with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, the Cement Sustainability Initiative, which is being conducted under the umbrella of the World Business Council, the International Council on Mining and Metals, and the Chief Medical Officers Network, which is a network of about 50 chief medical officers from some of the world's largest companies and who work together on best practices around health and well-being in the workplace. So also very happy to be reaching out to some new groups in addition to those who have been with GRI for a long time. The webinars were mainly informative sessions where we presented the contents and we invited stakeholders to ask questions to us directly. But in addition to that, we have also organized workshops in different regions of the world to gather local feedback from the users of the standards. And this is also in response to a request by the GSSB and the Due Process Oversight Committee back in March when we approved the membership of the project working group and where the GSSB and the DPOC requested that we do targeted consultations for some of the regions that are not so well represented in the working group. So that being mainly Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So far we've had workshops in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. And we have more workshops coming up in Brazil, South Africa, as well as in Canada and the US. And so far, based on the workshops we've had in China and Taiwan, we can confirm that we are hearing similar feedback as we're hearing generally across the globe. So it's actually good for us to see that the contents that have been developed by the project working group resonate in a similar way in some of those regions that were not so well represented. Here is an overview of the engagement we've had to date as of the 18th of September. The recorded webinar on the website has had about 550 views. We have engaged nearly 220 different stakeholders through our webinars and in-person workshops. The draft standard has been downloaded 522 times from our website, and these are unique downloads. We do not count people who go and download the draft again. And we have had nearly 1,000 views of our project page, and again, these are unique visitors. On the platform, we've had 204 registrations to date, and that's for both occupational health and safety and water. And out of those, 54 are active users for occupational health and safety. And that means that they have access the section in the platform which hosts the occupational health and safety materials for the public comment. And to date, we've had 13 submissions on the occupational health and safety standard. In addition to these figures, we have also reached out to some of the key partners in this space and some of the most relevant organizations in the field. Some examples are ISO, the entire group working on the ISO 45001 have been informed. We have reached out to the International Commission on Occupational Health, the World Health Organization, the Bangladesh Accord, and many others. And also 2 weeks ago, the World Congress on Health and Safety took place in Singapore, where 6,000 people attended. And 4 of our working group members delivered keynotes at that Congress and then highlighted this project and the opportunity to comment. So overall, we're very happy with the engagement. Also, when you take into account that we started the public comment in the middle of the summer break for many of us. So really, really happy with the engagement we've had to date. In addition, we had some online media coverage, mainly in the US, thanks mainly to the work of the Center for Safety and Health Sustainability in the US, who are part of our working group. And they have done a tremendous job in promoting this public comment in the US and Canada. So here are some examples of the articles that have featured the public comment. There's an article by Bloomberg BNA, which is the branch of Bloomberg looking at legal, tax, and accountancy-related issues. Another article by the Environmental Protection webpage, inviting occupational health and safety experts to give feedback on the draft. And then some of the professional bodies in Canada and in the US, which are part of the Center for Safety and Health Sustainability, have also promoted this actively through their networks. Here's an example of the Canadian Society of Safety Engineers, and all of these bodies together represent more than 100,000 health and safety professionals globally. So again, really pleased with the reception and the uptake to date. In terms of the feedback that we are hearing, in general, we see that there is support for the overall direction and intent of the standard. In particular, stakeholders like the introduction of health and safety hazards, the hierarchy of controls, and the access to occupational health services. Those are seen as very positive developments. There are, though, areas that are found particularly challenging by stakeholders and that still need a bit of refinement and clarification. But I want to point out that many of those comments are framed in the context of this is a very positive development and this is a significant improvement over what we have currently. And I've picked out one of the quotes or comments that has come in through the platform from a health and safety professional in the US who says, and I quote, "I was rather critical, although constructive in my comments, but I need to be specific in that this draft is the best I have seen, period. I am excited, and you ought to be proud. Thank you." So this is the kind of feedback that we are hearing, which is very reassuring and encouraging. So in terms of the areas that are highlighted as being particularly challenging, we have selected a few examples to share with you today. It is still too early to identify any clear trends with just 13 submissions that have come in, but these are some of the comments that are starting to emerge. The first two comments here relate to the feasibility of reporting against the draft for both large and small and medium-sized companies. The first comment says that some of the questions might be easy to answer for small companies with only a few sites, but for large companies there might be problems. And the specific examples that were given here were the narrative requirements to describe formal committees in place and processes for worker participation and consultation, which for those companies with a lot of sites, that might result in many different forms of engagement that would need to be described in the report. But similarly, it's also been raised a few times that the ability for SMEs to report on all of the items in the draft may also be difficult. These two comments are not necessarily unique to occupational health and safety. We do see these types of comments in nearly all of the public comments that we do for the guidelines and the standards. So I think they point to challenges with sustainability reporting in general, but we will nevertheless have a look at the specific suggestions that are being made and work together with the working group to ensure that the draft is workable for all companies to the extent possible. Following on these comments, there are a few areas of the standard that we anticipated would be especially challenging for companies, and we consulted specifically on those issues through our questionnaire and our local engagements in the different regions where we organized workshops. One of those areas is the high potential incidents, which is a new element that has been introduced in the draft. And what we are hearing is that the high potential can be quite subjective to define, and that may result in information that is very difficult to compare company to company, and that it may be more relevant perhaps to report on all near misses or to report on the process behind identifying high potential incidents and what action is being taken to address those. Another area particularly challenging is the requirement to report on work-related illnesses for workers who are not employees. What we are hearing so far through the platform and other channels is that this is quite difficult to report for most companies due to the high turnover of contractors And what would be feasible for companies is to report on illnesses for long-term contractors. But for those that are working only on a temporary basis or as a one-off for the company, that would be too challenging for them to compile. And similar comments also for outsourced work that is being flagged as particularly challenging for any of the data points that we have in the draft. And finally, we also had a request, again coming through the platform and other channels, to give much more emphasis to workers' mental health. I want to point out that all of these comments have already been discussed as part of the development process by the project working group. So good to see that nothing completely different is being flagged as part of the public comment. But we will nevertheless bring these issues back to the working group again for discussion and consider all of the comments that have come in. At this stage, it's still a bit too early to say, but based on what we have heard to date, we do not expect the need for re-exposure, but we will be able to give you a much more clear indication next month during the next GSSB meeting once we have gone through the first set of feedback. Before I finalize, I wanted to have a quick look at the timeline and the next steps for finalizing the draft standard and how we envision your engagement in this process. Following the close of the public comment on the 9th of October, the Standards Division will analyze all of the feedback and work together with the working group and the GSSB sponsors to go through all of the comments and make necessary changes to the draft. And that work will stretch until the end of February of 2018. At the moment, we're expecting to be able to share the final set of recommendations with the GSSB for approval in March, and following that there will be the usual due process requirement checks, and based on this, the earliest possible date where we can expect the final standard to be released will be at some point during the second quarter of 2018. After that, there will be the usual rollout and launch activities. And we expect, based on previous experience, that will stretch until the end of the calendar year. So that's an important consideration for team capacity. So there will be publication services that we will need to update or that we might want to create to help companies implement the changes. There'll be translations to update. So a lot of work will go also on rolling out the standard. In terms of how we plan to engage the GSSB, next month we will be able to present to you the main themes that are emerging from the public feedback. As input for the meeting in November, we will share the full set of comments that have come in through the platform and the workshops. And during the November and February meeting, we will give you an update on how the drafts are progressing and what are the changes that are being discussed by the working group. And either in November or February, we will bring a proposed effective date and transition period for the standard for you to discuss once we start to understand the full extent of changes that will be introduced in the standard. So with that, I'll turn it over to Judy to solicit any questions or comments from the GSSB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that update. Just to say, from where I sit on the sidelines of this project, I mean, there has been quite a lot of comparative publicity around this and some strong participation. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that the participants in the working group are of such good quality, so we're very grateful to all of those experts for making themselves available to this process. I'd like to say, just for the record, that in the course of the meeting, we have welcomed both Julia Wilson and Daniel Ingram to the table as well. welcome to both of you. Thank you for your persistence in getting here. Are there any questions or items for discussion with respect to the OH&S standards project? Any particular feedback from the observers from the GSSB that we haven't covered already? Kirsten.
It would be wrong to say that we haven't covered it already, but I would just give my support to what Laura has already said, and that the process have been impressive in the work group.
Thank you. Okay, Laura, it doesn't look like we have any particular questions for you at this point. Thank you very much for the update, and we'll look forward to hearing the themes from the public comment process and obviously the response of the working group members as we go forward. So we can move straight then into the project update on water standards, and Anna will walk us through this one.
I don't have the mic over there, so I'll have to present from here. Good morning, everyone. I'll do the similar job that Lara did and present how the public comment period has went for the water project. And I have to say that it has been largely aligned and it run in parallel, as you have seen, with the public comment for OH&S, and our outreach efforts have been largely aligned, so I will not repeat a lot of the things that have been said already before me. And just touching slightly on the recent progress, so we have also had 2 live webinars that were open to our stakeholders. We have held dedicated webinars and workshops for these organizations, for the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, the SEMEN Sustainability Initiative, ICMM, also a number of webinars and workshops for financial and investment institutions based here in the Netherlands, and a webinar for one of our project working group members based in India. We have held 3 in-person workshops in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. We have also held a workshop at the Stockholm World Water Week, and this is the largest and the most important event on water stewardship and water management yearly, and we have convened a session together with the Zero Water Mandate around road testing the draft disclosures of the standard, and have received feedback from their signatories, the signatories of the Zero Water Mandate. We have 5 more workshops coming up in regions in Brazil, Colombia, South Africa, and North America, and 2 additional live webinars similar to those we have held in the beginning of this public comment. Again, these numbers are coincidentally very similar to the progress numbers for OH&S. So we have 550 views of the recorded webinar that is available on our website. We have engaged over 225 participants in these workshops and webinars that I have been talking about. We have a little over 1,000 views of the project page. And to date, the online consultation platform, which is our major and most important channel for receiving feedback, we have seen 9 submissions to that platform, but we do expect these numbers to increase significantly as we start targeting these 200 users that you see registered that have not submitted their feedback yet next week, and then the week before the close of public comment, and we expect that these numbers will increase as we have seen previously throughout other public consultation processes before. And there are nearly 60 active users who are looking at the standard and who are making some comments but not submitting the full set of comments, so we expect these also to come and comment. We have also, we're holding a special initiative which is separate from our common activities during the public comment, and this is a reporting mock-up initiative. So we have approached a number of companies and asked them to look at the draft disclosures and sit down with their reporting departments and try to respond to the disclosures and to the that are currently in the water standard, look based on the reporting they do already, based on the data they collect already, based on the reporting systems they have in place, and to tell us how feasible it will be for them to report against these revised disclosures, because the comments we will receive through public consultation platform, of course, are very valuable, but we think that until actually company sits down, or a few companies sit down and try to disclose against these, I mean, this will give us much more detailed feedback. And companies that are going through this exercise right now are Coca-Cola. Thank you to Attila's efforts. Right after this, we have a call scheduled with Danone, who have also expressed their interest in participating in this initiative. So, very excited about this, because the feedback we receive through this particular initiative is very different from that we receive through public comment platform. And we have at least these companies that you see here on the screen promoting the public comment through their social media channels, through their newsletters, through their email communication. So these are the leading organizations in the water management and water stewardship space, other reporting frameworks. As well, we have individual companies who promote the public comment, water experts, the Gold community members who have done a really good job in circulating the announcements through their networks. Our comms department at the back has been tweeting and sending out communication about this every week. And the feedback that we're hearing so far, again, it's based on the 9 submissions that we've heard and talks that we had during these webinars and workshops that we've held. But overall, there is an approval of where the standard is, of how the standard is changing, and especially concerning the shift towards including or measuring impacts in the water-stressed areas, including discharge and effluent content. We have heard that this was a long-awaited change in the draft standard, and the inclusion of consumption metrics, which really brings us in line with other reporting frameworks which companies also wanted to see. We have still received varying feedback about reporting water discharge and disclosures we have put around reporting water discharge, and similar to the project working group that whose opinion has split between reporting water discharge through levels of treatment or through levels of quality. So reporting levels of treatment might be, they say, easier for certain companies to report, but then the other sort of camp in the working group actually says that no, they might not have this information available, and for them, reporting levels of water quality might be more feasible. And so we hear the same feedback coming through the public consultation, and at this point, not enough to make a conclusion of how we approach this further. We hear increasingly about difficulties around reporting substances of concern, and the way this is phrased right now in the disclosures leaves it quite open as to whether we're asking information about the substances of concern for different processes, facilities. Do we want? We're not asking also for companies to report their certain substances of concern. So. We need to work out our language a little bit clear, and we need to bring back this concern to the working group and see how we improve this particular disclosure. And some of the approaches that we have heard suggested by our public is that by our stakeholders is to move to or to focus on asking about compliance to substances of concern and move that into the management approach as a requirement. But we will have to discuss that with the project working group, whether we proceed in this way. Not surprisingly, we hear a lot of pushback on changing the recycling and reuse metrics from a requirement to a recommendation. I do have to repeat that our working group felt really strongly that from an impact perspective, this really is not a critical metric, because it doesn't tell you anything about the impacts companies having in a sensitive location, about the impacts it has through its water discharges. And so this has not been included in the draft standard, but we will have to bring it back again to the working group to see if we need to make language around recycling and reuse stronger in the standard, or if we indeed need to bring it back as a requirement. We hear repeated requests from our stakeholders to include efficiency metrics, efficiency and intensity metrics around reporting water consumption and withdrawal volumes. But I have to say that this has already been discussed with the project working group, and their conclusion was that we will not be able to come up, or they will not be able to define a metric, an efficiency metric that will be comparable, or that will provide data that will be comparable and benchmarkable across different companies and sectors. And we could have, for example, left it open for companies to describe what efficiency metrics they use, but we would then run the risk of getting information that might not be credible, as some reporters are not really advanced in how they define their efficiency metrics. And finally, more guidance is needed around, we hear that more guidance and clear language is needed around defining water stress, and in particular, the indicators in the tools and the methodologies that we suggest for companies to use. The more guidance around what the sources of water withdrawal mean, and does this include, whether this includes rainwater and what third-party water is, and more guidance around defining levels of treatment and quality, and the scope of the supply chain, as a lot of companies have come back to us saying, well, so we want us to report on supply chain, but do we have to look at our tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, or how far do we need to go in that? So more guidance around that is needed. I do want to make a remark to you, and also this is something that we will need to remember as we close the public comment and analyze feedback, that a lot of the commenting organizations, that they tend to overlook, or I guess forget about the nature of the GRI standards, and that they need to be universally applicable, and that we have a very specific, that the GRI standard is very different from other frameworks out there, and has a certain sort of distinct aim, and this is why some comments are really focused on a particular, let's say, industry, and we just need to remember that as we analyze the comments and make our recommendations to the working group. So at the moment, similar to the OHS standard, we do not expect the need for re-exposure. Of course, if we see the numbers of submitted feedback escalate exponentially on the 9th of October, then that might change, but at the moment, no. We don't expect the need for re-exposure, and then for you, the working group is expected then to make their final recommendations, issue their final recommendations by the end of February, and we will be able to bring those back to you in early in March for your approval of the standard, with the expected release date and launch activity scheduled in the second quarter, or after the second quarter of 2018. Now, I want to discuss a little bit the implications for the standard setting process. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you go back 2 slides? One more.
Here?
So, yeah, I'm not understanding if you do have the information about the third bullet point, difficulties around reporting substance of concern, suggested approach to focus on compliance. Compliance with what?
So this means that what we could ask instead in the management approach is companies to say whether they comply with the certain permit levels that exist, for example, that they have defined themselves, or that exist in their countries. But that means that we won't be able to compare this information. So this approach has been discussed by the working group, and for that reason, not accepted as the one we include in the draft standard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So as for the implications to the standard setting process, as Bastian has mentioned earlier, of course the content from the effluents and waste standard 306, the effluents content has been cut from the standard, and so we're left with disclosures that are only relevant to waste in the standard, and we at least need to address the structural change. And if we look at how what these disclosures focus on, is that they focus on they addressed sort of waste minimization strategies and how companies should generate, treat, and dispose their waste. So they're at a high level, they focus on the outputs of production and consumption. Now, If we look at the materials standard, which, as Bastian mentioned in his download figures earlier, is the second most downloaded environmental standard, on the other hand, it focuses on the inputs to production and consumption, so how companies should recycle, reuse, and reclaim materials and products and packaging. And if we look at the latest developments in the resources management field, there are a few significant things have been happening, and the most evident and the strongest one is the shift towards a circular economy, which looks at making sort of the outputs of production and processes become their inputs, and through promoting closed-loop systems and optimization of optimizing resource yields. And this is supported by, among one of its key principles, and this is supported by a number of significant legislative and financial initiatives. So it's the most important one, I guess, is the EU Circular Economy Package released in 2015 that sets out the action plan for EU to transition to a circular economy. China also has a Circular Economy Action Plan, which also outlines a roadmap for them to transition to CE between 2015 and 2020. As a result of the Circular Economy Package, there is currently lying a proposal on waste in the EU that sets really ambitious targets for reducing and recycling waste, including packaging. It also sets measures to promote reuse and reuse of materials and industrial symbiosis, which is a system that looks at turning byproducts of one industrial process into inputs for another in order to use less raw material. And also it sets out incentives to support recovery and recycling of critical materials found in waste, electric and electrical equipment. There is also, of course, the SDGs, the SDG 12, Sustainable Consumption and Production, and its target 12.5, which aims to reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. And finally, earlier this year, there was the first standard on circular economy released by the BSI, and it sets out the framework for companies to implement the principles of their circular economy in their operations, and also helps organizations holistically rethink how they manage their resources and how they can enhance their financial, sort of environmental and social benefits as a result of this. So what I'm trying to, I guess, the message I'm trying to send to you is that, of course, these initiatives and these latest developments in the field, they tell us that there is a need to revise the waste and materials, the standards, but also really something for your consideration later in your talks today and tomorrow is, should these two standards, the waste and material standards, given this shift towards sort of a circular economy, really exist as a separate standard, or maybe they need to be incorporated in one under the umbrella of a circular economy or another title. So this is for your discussion later on. And as for the standards division, we will put together a proposal and submit it for your discussion on the call on November 30th about how we propose to approach the update of these two or one standard. And in the meantime, we asked for you to provide us any recommendations on leads to contact in the waste, materials, or perhaps the circular economy space. With this, back to Judy.
Thank you very much, Anna. We are behind schedule. I'm told that we can make up some of the time a little bit later on this morning, so let's not worry too much about it right now. But just briefly, again, this is at exactly the same sort of stage of development as the OH&S standard. So I think you all sort of should understand the process at this point and where we stand with it. Are there any questions or points for discussion or particular inputs from the observers from the GSSB? Stian.
Thanks, Judy. I'll be short. One of the concerns is just the increase that I see from ESG questionnaires around materiality or material use and waste, and it's like of the DJSI Sustainalytics and the rest of them that we get on an almost weekly basis now. And alignment, where we can find alignment to report once and use the information in different platforms. So just a comment that we need to keep an eye on that as well.
Okay, we will be looking at some of these issues again as we look at our work plan going forward later on in this meeting. If there are no other questions or comments, oh, I'm sorry, Robin, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. I just had two quick questions. I was just wondering, with the way the draft has been prepared implies that the reporters would be doing like a water mass balance in some ways. Is there any early feedback on their level of comfort with that as an ambition? And my second question was if there's been any specific outreach in terms of the agricultural and sort of food production sector. I'm particularly thinking of the relationship back to the SDGs on zero hunger and food security, and the relationship to climate change and water as a constraint. So groups like the Food and Agricultural Organisation, for example, if there's been some specific outreach to those sorts of sectors.
So on your first question about the water balance and how that has been received in the draft standard, overall, yes, it's been positive. So companies are happy to see that. The way we're presenting, or have presented this in the revised standard, is in a very simple, let's say, way, because we can only go so far. Given the nature of the GRI standards, we have not yet received feedback on those, detailed feedback on the tables that we have put out there that helps actually to, for companies to present this information. So I can't give you more information about this, but overall, yes, the feedback was positive about this idea of trying to get to water balance. Regarding your second question about sort of the water, food, climate nexus, and whether outreach has been done to organizations working in this field, we have worked closely with CDP, and they are largely focusing on addressing also this issue in their water questionnaire. So promotion has been done through their channels, and I guess this is the best we've done with our efforts in reaching out to sort of that field.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. So we have a break now. Could we please come back at 11? Yeah, 11 o'clock local time. If you could please be prompt in coming back to the table, then we can start straight away at 11. That would be great, so we can try to pick up some of the time. Thank you.